Disclaimer: this content is intended for mature audiences only. Viewer discretion is advised. The night it happened was supposed to be ordinary. The kind of night where you come home, drop your keys on the counter, and let the quiet wrap around you like a blanket. But that quiet, it didn't feel comforting. It felt loaded. Heavy. Like the air itself was holding its breath. I remember the soft hum of the fridge, the faint smell of rain drifting through the open window, and then, without warning, the entire house went black. The power cut out, leaving me in the kind of darkness that makes you hear your own heartbeat. I wasn't alone. She was there, sitting just a few feet away on the couch, her face barely visible in the dim glow from the streetlights outside. We'd known each other for years, and yet that night, something about her felt different. Maybe it was the way her voice sounded softer in the dark. Or maybe it was the way the shadows framed her, making her seem closer than she really was. We started talking, nothing deep at first, just small things. But slowly, the words began to carry weight. Each laugh lingered too long. Each pause stretched into something unspoken. You know how people say moments like this don't just happen, they build? I felt it. Every glance was a step forward. Every shift in the air was a door cracking open. And part of me knew, deep down, that once I walked through, there would be no going back. She leaned forward, her hand brushing mine by accident, or maybe not. I couldn't tell anymore. My pulse kicked up. I tried to tell myself it was just the darkness, just the tension of being stuck without power. But then she whispered something low enough that I couldn't catch every word, but enough to make me feel the heat rising in my chest. The rain outside picked up, drumming softly against the glass. We both turned our heads toward the sound, but neither of us moved away from that small space between us. My mind was racing. The memories of promises I had made, the life I had built, and yet, here I was, teetering on the edge of a choice that could change everything. It's strange how the absence of light can strip away all the distractions. In the dark, there was nothing but her eyes, catching just enough light to pull me in. She asked me if I was cold. I wasn't. But I didn't say no. If you've ever been in a moment where right and wrong blur into something you can't quite name, you know exactly what I felt. And maybe you've wondered, like I did, whether crossing that invisible line was fate, temptation, or just the part of you you've been hiding all along. I'd known her for years, but never like this. Most of our history was built in daylight at neighborhood barbecues, weekend coffee runs, and those quick chats in the driveway that always ended with a polite smile and a wave. She was the kind of person everyone liked, the one you trusted without question. And maybe that's why it felt so dangerous now, sitting in the dark with her, realizing just how much I'd missed in all the time we'd known each other. Her name was Lauren. She'd moved into the house across the street 3 years ago with her fiancé, a quiet guy who traveled often for work. We became casual friends, the kind where you might borrow a cup of sugar or watch each other's pets. Nothing more, nothing less. Or so I told myself. But that night, with no lights, no distractions, and no safe distance, I was seeing her differently. The sound of the rain outside seemed to hush the rest of the world, and every word between us felt like it was floating in its own little bubble. She told me about her day, how she'd been stuck at home working on a project, how she'd lost track of time and hadn't eaten yet. I found myself hanging on every detail, not because the story was anything special, but because it was her voice, her presence, the way she made ordinary moments feel layered with something more. I told her about my week, careful to keep things light, but she had a way of looking at me that made it hard to stay on the surface. Her questions lingered in the air. Do you ever wonder what your life would look like if you'd made one different choice? I didn't answer right away. Maybe because deep down, I already knew what she was asking wasn't about my career or my hobbies, it was about something else entirely. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the room for a split second. In that brief light, I caught the smallest shift in her expression, something caught between curiosity and recognition. Then the darkness swallowed us again. My chest felt tight, not from fear, but from the strange pull between us. We talked about the neighborhood, the people who had moved away, the little things we noticed when no one else was paying attention. At some point, she moved closer, just enough that I could feel the warmth from her without actually touching. It was subtle, almost innocent, but I noticed. And I knew she noticed me noticing. There was a kind of safety in the dark, but also a danger. It made it too easy to forget the lines we weren't supposed to cross. I kept thinking about how, in a few hours, the lights would come back on and everything would go back to normal, at least. That's what it should be. But I also knew that even if we never spoke of it again, this night would be lodged in my mind, impossible to erase. I told her a story from years ago, about a time I'd been caught in a storm far from home, how I'd taken shelter in a stranger's porch until it passed. She listened like it was the most important thing in the world. And when she laughed softly at the part where I slipped on the wet steps, it didn't feel like she was laughing at me, it felt like she was letting me in. And that's when I realized it wasn't just the power that had gone out. Something else had shifted too, something between us that had been hidden in plain sight. I didn't know where it would lead. I only knew the night was far from over. The storm outside didn't let up. Rain hammered against the windows, wind rattled the old wooden frames, and somewhere down the street a loose metal sign kept clanging every time a gust hit. Inside, the darkness seemed thicker now, wrapping around us like it wanted to keep us in this moment forever. The more I thought about stepping away, the harder it became to actually do it. Lauren shifted slightly, tucking her legs beneath her on the couch, and her knee brushed against mine. It was quick, almost nothing, but the space between us felt even smaller after that. My mind kept replaying the question she had asked earlier about choices, about how one decision could change everything. It was like she had planted a seed, and now it was growing in the dark, roots wrapping around thoughts I didn't want to admit I was having. I knew the boundaries. I knew the promises I had made to someone else. But I also knew how rare it was to feel this, seen. It wasn't just attraction, it was the way she listened, the way she looked at me like she understood things I didn't say out loud. That's the part that scared me more than anything. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. She leaned back, her head tilting toward the sound, then looked at me with that half-smile that seemed to say she wasn't in any hurry for the night to end. She told me her fiancé had been gone for almost a month on another overseas trip, and she had stopped counting the days because it made the waiting feel longer. I didn't ask if she missed him. I didn't want to hear the answer. The conversation drifted into safer topics, old music, movies we'd both seen too many times, but the undercurrent stayed. Every word, every pause, every glance carried something unspoken. I caught myself noticing small details, the way she curled her fingers when she laughed, the faint scent of her perfume, the way her hair framed her face when she leaned forward. At one point, she got up to grab a flashlight from the kitchen. When she came back, she set it down on the coffee table without turning it on. "It's better like this," she said quietly. And she was right. The dark had its own gravity, pulling us closer without either of us moving too fast. I started thinking about how things might look from the outside. If someone walked in right now, what would they see? Two neighbors stuck in a blackout, sharing a conversation? Or something else entirely? The thought should have made me step back, create distance. Instead, I stayed exactly where I was. Then she asked me something I wasn't expecting. "Do you think we choose moments like this, or do they choose us?" I didn't answer right away, because I wasn't sure I wanted to know my own answer. I could hear my own heartbeat over the storm. The power could come back at any second. The lights could flood the room and expose whatever this was before it had a chance to happen. And yet, a small part of me was hoping the darkness would hold just a little longer. If you were in my place, knowing what you stand to lose, but also feeling something you can't quite explain, what would you do? Drop your answer in the comments and tell me if you think moments like this are accidents or fate. The storm's rhythm had settled into something almost hypnotic, but inside, my thoughts were anything but calm. The air between us felt charged, like a thin wire pulled tight and waiting to snap. Every time I thought about saying something to break the tension, my mind tangled itself in questions, ones I didn't want to answer out loud. Lauren leaned back into the couch, her shoulder brushing mine just enough to make my breath catch. It was a touch so small, it could have been nothing, but it wasn't. Not in this moment. Not with everything hanging in the balance. She glanced at me, eyes catching what little light spilled in from outside, and for a second, it felt like the rest of the room disappeared. A sudden flash of lightning lit up the space, quick and bright, and in that split second I saw her watching me, really watching. The moment the light faded, the darkness seemed even heavier. My pulse was racing now, though I tried to keep my voice steady as I asked if she wanted to light the flashlight. She shook her head slowly, like she already knew what the dark was doing for us. The power flickered once, long enough for the overhead light to hum to life and cast its pale glow across the room, before plunging us back into shadow. That flicker was a jolt. It reminded me of everything waiting for me outside this little bubble, everything that would come crashing back if the lights stayed on for good. Lauren shifted closer, almost like she was afraid the power might return at any second and take this moment away. She told me she hated storms, but not this one. There was something in her tone, something that made the space between us feel impossibly small. Every sound in the house seemed louder, the ticking of the wall clock, the slow creak of the floor as she adjusted her position, the soft way she drew in a breath before speaking. My mind was running through a dozen versions of what could happen next, each one more dangerous than the last. And then, there was silence. No wind. No rain. Just stillness, like the storm itself was holding its breath. I realized I was doing the same. Her hand shifted on the couch cushion, inching toward mine, and my heart pounded so hard I was sure she could hear it. The space between what I should do and what I wanted to do had never felt smaller. I could feel the moment tipping, about to spill over into something we couldn't take back. The silence didn't last. It broke with the sharp crack of a branch snapping outside, followed by hurried footsteps on the wet pavement. Lauren's eyes darted toward the window, her fingers still inches from mine, frozen in place. For a heartbeat, I thought maybe it was nothing, just the wind, or a stray animal, but then the sound came again, closer this time. Someone was out there. She rose quietly, moving toward the window, and I followed without thinking. The glass was cold under my fingertips as I peered out into the dim glow from the streetlight across the road. A shadow moved too tall, too quick to be anything ordinary. The figure paused near her front gate, then turned toward the side of her house. Lauren's breath hitched. My fiancé, she whispered, but the tone wasn't relief, it was something heavier. My stomach nodded. He wasn't supposed to be back for another 2 weeks. The air in the room shifted instantly. Whatever had been building between us now collided with the reality of the life she still had beyond this night. We stepped back from the window, the darkness around us suddenly feeling less like a refuge and more like a hiding place. The sound of the footsteps moved around the house, slow and deliberate, like he was checking every corner before coming inside. Lauren's hands trembled slightly, and when she looked at me, I could see the conflict written all over her face. "Why didn't you tell me he might come back early?" I asked softly. She shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "Because I didn't know, and because I didn't want to think about it." The knock on the door wasn't loud, but it was enough to make us both flinch. Neither of us moved right away. Then, just as suddenly, the power came back on, flooding the room with light and leaving us exposed in every sense of the word. We stood there in the brightness, the space between us feeling completely different now. Every glance, every unspoken thing from the last hour hung in the air like smoke that wouldn't clear. The knock came again, followed by his voice calling her name. Lauren glanced toward the door, then back at me. There was something in her eyes, fear, maybe, but also something else. A question. I didn't know if she wanted me to leave, to hide, or to stay. The weight of that decision pressed down hard, because whatever I chose next would change everything. The sound of keys jingling outside made my chest tighten. He was letting himself in. The clock on the wall ticked louder in those few seconds than it had all night. My mind raced through every possible outcome, and none of them felt safe. Then, just as the door began to open, Lauren reached out and grabbed my wrist. It wasn't forceful, but it stopped me in place. Her voice was low, urgent. "Don't go." In that instant, the stakes shifted again. This wasn't just about a moment in the dark anymore. It was about whatever she was about to pull me into. Something told me this night was about to get far more complicated than either of us had imagined. The door swung open, and her fiancé stepped inside, shaking the rain from his jacket. His eyes swept the room, pausing for just a fraction of a second when they landed on me. That pause was enough to send my pulse into overdrive. I forced a polite smile, the kind you wear when you know you're standing in the middle of a line you shouldn't have crossed. Lauren's hand slipped from my wrist, but the imprint of her touch lingered like a brand. She stepped forward, greeting him with a steady voice that didn't match the tension in her eyes. "You're back early," she said, moving to take his jacket. He glanced between us again, his expression unreadable, then offered a quick explanation about flight changes and storm delays. I could feel every second stretching, the air thick with the unspoken. Part of me expected him to ask why I was there, to question the blackout and the timing, but instead he just nodded toward the couch. "Power's back on, I see." His tone was casual, but I caught the way his gaze lingered, searching for something. We sat, the three of us, in a silence that was almost unbearable. Lauren filled it with small talk about the weather, about his trip, but the words felt flimsy against the weight of the night. I answered when spoken to, careful, controlled, all the while replaying the hours before the door opened, every glance, every pause, every choice. Then, just as I was about to stand and make my exit, he turned to me. "Thanks for keeping her company," he said. His voice was even, almost too even. "Storms can get lonely." There was no accusation, but the way he held my gaze told me he knew more than he was saying. Lauren's eyes flickered between us, and for a brief moment, I thought she might explain, confess, something. Instead, she just smiled faintly, her fingers tapping against her leg, betraying the calm she was trying to project. I finally stood, offering my goodbyes, and as I stepped out into the cool night air, the storm now reduced to a drizzle, I felt the strange mix of relief and regret settle in. I thought that was the end of it, until I reached my car. On the windshield, weighed down by a single stone, was a folded piece of paper. I opened it under the glow of the streetlight. In neat handwriting, it read, "You left something behind. Come back tomorrow." Alone. I sat in my car for what felt like forever, the note trembling slightly in my hand. The storm had passed, but the heaviness from inside that house lingered. I didn't know who had written it or why, but I knew one thing: it wasn't a random mistake. Someone had been watching. I could have ignored it, thrown the note away, and put the whole night behind me. But curiosity is its own kind of storm, and by morning, I was already driving back down her street. Lauren's car was gone. The house looked quiet. When I knocked, no one answered. I was turning to leave when a voice called from across the yard. It was her fiancé. He waved me over, a polite smile masking something sharper underneath. "Found this in the living room after you left," he said, handing me my watch. I hadn't even realized it was missing. Then, with the same even tone he'd used the night before, he added, "Storms bring people closer, but they also show you who's willing to stand where it's uncomfortable." I didn't know if it was a warning, a challenge, or both. I thanked him, slid the watch into my pocket, and walked away. That was the last time I saw either of them together. Weeks passed. Life fell back into its ordinary rhythm, but the memory of that night kept returning. How quickly trust can bend, how easily a moment can blur the lines you thought were unshakable. I never learned if Lauren told him what happened. Maybe she didn't have to. Maybe he already knew. The truth is, not every story ends with a clean answer. Sometimes the ending is just the space where two lives drift apart without ever saying why. But that night taught me something important. Temptation doesn't just test what you feel, it tests what you're willing to risk. And when the lights come back on, you have to live with the choices you made in the dark. If you've been in a moment like that, where you had to choose between what was safe and what your heart wanted, what did you do? And would you do it differently now? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to see a sequel to this story, tell me. I have a feeling there's more to uncover. Summary. In When the Lights Went Out, I crossed the line. True infidelity story. A storm and blackout set the stage for a night of unspoken attraction, blurred boundaries, and a single decision that changes everything. As darkness pulls two neighbors into dangerous territory, an unexpected return and a mysterious note leaves the narrator questioning what really happened and what was left unsaid. This suspenseful romantic drama explores trust, temptation, and the choices we make when no one's watching. 36.